on his way, he had his Humvee, his mighty Humvee. I'm sure he talked with a Schwarzeneggerian accent. And the Jews were on the right side here on Sukkah, and the Philistines were on the left side, and the battle was going to take place in the middle. And they sat there for months yelling at each other, trying to get this battle underway. Now, Saul in the past has had some initial victories against the Philistines and has driven them back out of this hill country that they are surrounded in and driven them back into some of the lowland areas. Now, you can see on the right side here, there's big mountains, and in the middle there's an area called the Shephelah. This is just sort of hill country. And this valley of Elah, you can see Gath and Ascah and Sukkah there, right smack dab in the middle, right above where it says Shephelah. And this is where they were fighting. This is where the battle lines had been drawn. Saul had pushed them a little ways, but now they're pushing back. And they think that they've got their secret weapon going. They think that they've gotten their weapons of mass destruction here in Goliath. And we see a man who is really a super soldier. He is a impressive specimen. The drawings of Goliath are, he's a huge man. 9 feet tall. 9 feet tall. And considering that the average Israelite at about that time was probably 5 feet tall. So he's twice as tall as anybody else. He has armor, he has strength, he has skill, he's been a warrior since his youth, and he has the super weapon of the day. That's why it refers to this spear being like a weaver's beam. In those days, they had just come out with a new technology where they wrapped a cord around the spear, had a loop on the end of the cord, and when they wrapped the cord around their wrist, and they could throw it much further and with much more accuracy because they had done this thing that they'd taken off of the weaver's loom. And it was the super weapon of the day, and you put it in the hand of a guy who's twice as tall as anybody, you've got to run for cover when this guy throws this thing. He was a super soldier, and he had the super weapons of the day, and he came out and defied the people of Israel. Choose a man to come down and fight with me. Choose a man. Send somebody down. Let's do some single combat here. Now, individual combat was known back then. There's other examples of this happening. But it almost never succeeded in limiting the warfare. They thought, all right, let's get the big guys out there. But the losing team never liked the score, so they just said, let's go to war. It was never worked out the way they wanted it to work out. The NIV says that that Goliath should send out, that the Israelites should send out a champion. Literally, this word means the man in between. I like it. I think this is what Christians ought to be. We ought to be the people in between the enemies in this world and the victims in this world. We need to be the man in between the enemies of God and God himself. This is what God is asking us to do. He's the one who enters into single combat between these two armies. He's the man in between. He's standing there doing what his job is supposed to be. Goliath is not called a giant. He is just called an amazingly tall guy. An exceedingly tall warrior. Over 9 feet tall. The only other person that we know of about his height was Saul. He was a head taller than anybody. It was like, hey, they've got their tall guy, we've got our tall guy. They should fight. Seems reasonable. And I think God was setting this up because the world was looking at height as a measure of getting something done, and God was looking at the heart and whether or not we could get something done. I mean, how big can this Goliath guy be? I like that. He's coming. He's a big guy. Unless there's just a little short body behind that hill. I don't know. Saul is the best match. He is the best match for Goliath. It's like he's been designed for this purpose, to fight this guy. But Saul and all the Israelites are paralyzed with fear. From the top guy down, they're all afraid of Goliath. But then we're introduced to David. And we get this description of David. And what an amazing contrast there is. We have this super soldier versus this punk kid. Goliath must have looked overpowering, even invincible. David, vulnerable, insignificant, a dog. A dog coming out to fight this great warrior. And nobody thought he had a chance. But hey, it's no big loss to the army if David dies. We face huge enemies. I don't know how this little guy survived, but I don't know if he did or not anyway. The text further characterizes David by contrasting him with everybody else. He's not afraid. Everybody else is. He's willing to go out in battle. Everybody else is back in the tents. It's not just David versus Goliath. Everybody else is running away from this guy. David then arrives here in this valley of Elah. His job was to bring support to the frontline troops. His job was to bring bread and cheese so that his brothers could survive in this army. And he personally witnesses Goliath's challenge. He's there when Goliath walks out and says, "Come on, I dare you. I double dog dare you to come out here and fight me." He learns that there's going to be a reward. Oh, In fact, I think that's why Eliab, his oldest brother, just really rips into him. He's going, "Hey, I could go get this reward." And Eliab is going, "You don't have any skills. You're not a soldier. You're just a goat roper. You don't have, get lost, kid. You're just thinking about the glory and you're not thinking about dying. We're big warriors here. And we can't stand up to this guy. What are you doing?" Well, David is matured enough to speak for himself. And he says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the contrast here is between the gods that Goliath serves versus the God that David serves. They are stone idols. He is serving the living God. They worship, nothing. Isaiah says that they worship vapors. But David realizes that he worships the living God, and he should do something about it. Everybody else is resigned to the situation. David is indignant. David is indignant that they haven't stood up for God's honor. They've just let him slide. David has learned to see things that others cannot see. He's learned to have a heart after God. David has learned to see things from God's perspective. Goliath has no power that God does not give him. And if God says to take it away, Goliath isn't going to stand in the way of that. The Israelites' troops see and hear this terrifying super soldier.